Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Commerce Meets Law YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining me once again. I hope that all of you that tuned in to the introductory video enjoyed it and are excited for what's upcoming. But today, I think I would like to call it as the first official video. We're getting into the content of the channel, and I hope that you're super pumped about it. So, today I'm going to be answering the very difficult question, I think, of what is commercial law. When I was looking through and trying to sort of, first of all, for my own research, when I started kind of looking into commercial law, and then again for this video, I was looking at definitions on websites and on YouTube and on various platforms. And whilst there were a couple of videos on it or a couple of websites on it, it was very difficult to find a comprehensive definition about it or something that, sort of gave you the answer. And I think that goes to show that it is so wide and so wide ranging. And so perhaps there isn't that definition. But I want to try and break it down today in a simple way of how I understand it and perhaps how that can help you as well. Firstly, I'd like to say a quick disclaimer before we do get into this video. I am not a qualified financial expert or a qualified lawyer, at least not yet. And so anything that I'm sharing today is purely based on my own research and on my own experiences. And so please, whatever you sort of take from this video, make sure you do your research as well. This should just serve as a serving or sort of as a starting point, as a guide for you to kind of then take that research further. So please do bear that in mind when you watch the rest of this video. Now, as always, and as I did in my first video, I'm going to break this kind of video down into 4 key questions. And once again, you can jump around between them if there are certain kind of sections that interest you more. So firstly, I'm going to start with what is commercial law. I'm going to have a brief look at some of the definitions I have found, all of which I will link down below the website so you can go check them out. And using that and using my own experience, how I've come to a definition and perhaps how you can formulate your own one as well. Secondly, I'm going to talk a bit about the sectors that are within commercial law. There is a sort of myth or a misconception that, commercial law is just one thing, and actually there's a lot of industries within it. So I'm going to kind of, discuss briefly what they might be and how wide ranging they are. Then we're going to look at what commercial lawyers actually do, which I think can be pretty opaque. We've spoken about it a bit on the podcast, and it's one of the aims of the podcast. But just to kind of again make that a bit more comprehensive, I want to do a bit of that today in that third section. And finally, I'm going to talk about why commercial law, right? And all of you who've done law firm application are thinking, I've seen that question before. And I've always struggled about, kind of thinking about how I should answer it. So hopefully, after looking at those first 3 sections and then combining that with the final one, it should hopefully culminate into giving you a good understanding about what commercial law is, and then look at whether you're firstly interested in it. And if you are interested in it, how you can show that interest when applying to law firms or generally any sort of commercial roles on a wider scale. So hopefully that sounds good to you. And if you do, I hope you keep watching. But for now, we're going to get into the first question. What is commercial law? Now, if I look down in this video, I'm looking down at my laptop where I've sort of got a few key notes. And for this first question, a few sort of notes from the websites that I've researched in order to answer this question. So what I did is, it's a bit of an experiment, and perhaps you can try it too. All I did was type into Google, what is commercial law? Because let's be honest, sometimes that's the point we are at, and that's perfectly okay. And I just wanted to see what came up and what sort of themes kept sort of coming every time you clicked on it. So I'm going to just give you a brief sort of outline on a couple of those websites. Again, I will link these down below so you can go have a look at the entirety of that page. But I just want to read you a few key things which may spring kind of, something into your mind and can help us give that comprehensive definition. So firstly, the All About Law page says commercial law disputes deal primarily with contract or tort laws. It involves issues that arise in the course of running a business at any stage of the commercial cycle. So, a few key things that jump out in here are, of course, that idea of a business. So, commerce in itself is connected to businesses and is connected to the operation of businesses. So, that's sort of what we get from that first definition. Then, the University of Law website talks about commercial law and definition for it and says it's a broad term for a range of legal services designed to support businesses in making money from their products and services. Now, any of us who have watched The Apprentice, which is restarting again this week, know that business is all about making money and ultimately making money by delivering a product or a service. So that is where commercial law can play a role. And every time there is a sort of, legal element to it, that's where commercial law can come in. So that's one of the other definitions. And then looking at Forage, and they've got a blog on commercial law. Again, these are really good websites to sort of keep up to date with and kind of, keep looking through for work experience and just information in general. This says commercial law is often called by different names: business law, trade law, or mercantile law. Ultimately, it covers all people and businesses who buy, sell, trade, or merchandise products, goods, and services. So once again, we see that key theme of business, of selling, and where commercial law comes in. I thought what was interesting about this definition is that it does talk about the fact that commercial law can be given different names and, people do treat it in different ways, which I thought was definitely one that should be talked about and should be discussed. So these were just a few of those definitions. Again, I'll put all of some of these websites down below and you can go have a further look at them. But when we are looking at these definitions, one of the key things that, or a skill that a lawyer should have, is being able to synthesize information and being able to sort of draw key elements that we can then kind of talk to about our clients, right? So we spend a lot of time reading large documents, and a lot of us may enjoy it, especially if you study law or study, like kind of an essay subject. However, clients don't have a lot of time. They want everything in, a sort of a 30-second email that they can read over really, really quickly. And so that first skill is going to come in handy here. What kind of themes do we see running through, and how can that help us form a comprehensive definition? So as I went through, I sort of highlighted a few of those. But of course, the first key theme is business. Commercial law comes from that word of commerce and law, which is why this channel is called Commerce Meets Law, of course. And commerce is, again, as we said, all about business. So it primarily is connected to businesses and the operation of businesses from a legal perspective. And that's where the law element comes in. Now, of course, the other key bit is the buying, selling, and trading of goods and services. And this is where that other distinction is really important to remember. So when we think about business, we probably think about, either the Amazons of the world, or we think about sort of those products, physical products. But of course, it can also include services, whether that's financial services, tech services, or legal services. All of that comes into it as well. And the other kind of thing to remember is we want to think about it from a micro level and a macro level. So what do I mean by that? A micro level in the sense of what you and I, so as consumers, it kind of, spend day to day, whether that's buying new clothes, buying food, doing sort of our grocery shop, or buying a house, all those sorts of things. But also on a macro level, what are governments doing? What are multinationals doing? All of this comes into commercial law. So we have to think about it from a both private perspective and a public perspective. So AKA businesses as in private kind of corporations and public institutions such as governments of the world. And we also have to think about it from a micro and a macro perspective. So those are the two other key things that we have to think about when considering the definition of commercial law. Now, the other sort of key element of this is also the dispute element. So when I read you that first definition, it spoke about commercial law disputes. And if any of you have looked into practice areas in a law firm, you probably heard that thing of transactional areas versus contentious ones. Now, that is something to get into in another video. It's a whole other topic in itself, and I will cover it in due course. But all you need to know for now is that there is work which is done by negotiating with the other side. So That is, a healthy discussion where both sides are trying to come to, the same outcome. Both probably want the same thing, and it's about getting to that outcome. And the contentious side, as the name suggests, is probably more of what you think of when you think of what lawyers do, right? Kind of fighting across, not necessarily fighting, but you probably have different aims that you want to get to. And so you're trying to win in that sense. So you're trying to, get the best outcome for your client. And that may look different to the objective of the opposing counsel. So that's another key distinction to remember. So what have we covered so far? Micro versus macro, private versus public, and also all of that relating to business and the ideas of what businesses do on a day-to-day perspective. So the thing to kind of take from this is also commercial law. As we've seen, there are so many different kind of areas that it can connect to, and I'm going to speak a bit more about this in the next section. But what you want to remember is that because of this is why we have so many commercial law firms, not just in the UK, but all across the world. And so when we are thinking about what sort of firm we want to work in, we have to remember that different firms cater to different clients based on their expertise, based on their current clientele, and also, of course, based on their connections. Because as we know, law is a people business. So that is also something you want to bear in mind when you're looking at firms. What sort of kind of expertise that they have, and what sort of clientele do they have. So hopefully that's given you perhaps not a definition in itself, but perhaps kind of areas to think about when you're thinking of how we define commercial law. And why the definition is important is so you can understand where you fit into this and where your interests fit into this. So quite a long-winded way of getting to that first definition, but hopefully that is proven helpful. But now I wanted to speak a little bit about the sectors or the industries that fall under it. Now, what do I mean by that? So as we just sort of explored in the first question, commercial law is so broad. It is extremely wide ranging. And that's because businesses are extremely wide ranging, right? So we have a lot of different interests and hobbies and wants and needs. And so businesses cater to all of that, whether that's a private company or a public corporation. Either of those cater to various interests in society that people across the world have. So that obviously means that lawyers are needed in every single one of these sectors. So the sectors that we have under commercial law are, of course, that wide ranging according to our needs. So everything from things like life sciences and tech, which a lot of people are talking about right now, things like crypto, AI, all of these sort of social media platforms, but also those really important necessary industries like energy, like oil and gas, those that we use every day, things like consumer retail, obviously our financial services, our banks, lending, all of that also comes into it. So it goes from these new and upcoming industries that we're looking at right now to also those things that we use every day and probably don't even think about, right? So all of those supermarkets, every time you go into a Sainsbury's, perhaps now you're thinking these are all sectors that commercial law caters to. And also within those organizations, right? So things like employment, when we have a job, we sign certain contracts, and those are all, there's a lawyer who needs to look through that. So there, again, that micro and macro difference. So within an organization, all of the different areas that we have, things like tax, things like employment, things like pensions, but also those macro points, so those wide-ranging industries. So once again, it's all about breadth and depth. We have to think about it from a wide perspective and then also drill into those specifics. So that's something to bear in mind as well. And when we're talking about sectors, the reason I want to highlight this is because one of the things that a lot of people talk about when they want to, kind of join law firms is because they are full service, right? This idea of full service firms is where we want to go because we want a lot of options, and a lot of people don't exactly know which area they want to specialize in. And so they want choice when they end up going. So when we do think about full service, there is a bit of a caveat that we have to consider. So when we are looking at certain firms, yes, they may operate on a full service basis, but it's likely that they have expertise in certain areas. And that has either been formed by the kind of clients that they've had and the sort of work they have done for them. So they have built that expertise. But it also may be the strength of those lawyers who are in the firm and who are there from the start. So especially the partners who are the ones sort of bringing in the clients, that's perhaps where their expertise lies. So it's very important when you are looking at law firms and when you've decided you want to go into a full service one, to then also look at exactly which areas they are sort of ranking in at the top. So again, I'll put these websites down below, but looking at things like kind of, Chamber Student, looking at things like the Legal 500 and checking those rankings. So let's say you're interested in a particular sector, perhaps things like private equity, or you're particularly interested in IT or IP law, looking at what the rankings of that firm are for that specific sector. And of course, the higher the ranking, the better their clients, the more expertise that they have, and the better training you're going to get if you end up going there. So that's one thing to think about when we are thinking about sectors, and that's why it matters. The other reason it matters is because of the theme of commercial awareness. So, I've spoken about this theme a lot, especially those of you who have listened to the podcast are aware of this. However, commercial awareness, again, must be targeted, particularly when you are doing those law firm applications. You want to make sure that you're not just reading the FT for the sake of it, but you're reading it with a motivation, with a reason in mind. And that can come from looking at these expertise, or this sort of, the expertise that these firms have. So, for example, if a lot of a firm's clients are in the energy sector, when you're reading up and when you're building your commercial awareness for that particular firm, you can read about the recent and most recent developments in the energy industry and use that to talk about what future kind of problems can arise, or what sort of future firms can be coming up, which can be clients for that law firm. The other thing you can also look at is, okay, let's look at what the biggest clients of a firm are. Which industries are they operating in? And what sort of trends and themes are coming up in the next year or so? How is that going to impact the advice that we give to our clients? So, in this way, you can really target your commercial awareness, because you either know the sectors that the firm is operating in or where a lot of their clients are, and you can look at trends, or you can look the other way, looking at their clients, looking at which industries they operate in, and then target your commercial awareness accordingly. This also means that sometimes it can feel really overwhelming, because you feel like you have to know the entirety of the Financial Times or the Economist, or any of those kind of newspaper articles, but that is impossible, right? We can't know all of the news all around the world. So targeting in this way, using the sectors and using those particular areas which the firm has an expertise in, is going to be a really good way for you to target that commercial awareness. So that was our second section. Hope that was useful in terms of how you can target that commercial awareness, and talking a little bit about why commercial law is so wide ranging. Alrighty, so the next section is, of course, talking about what are those tasks, what are those kind of day-to-day things that lawyers get involved with. Now, of course, I'm going to say the caveat again, like I said at the beginning, I'm not qualified yet, and so I don't actually work at a law firm. This has all come from research and from talking to people about the experiences that they've had on the podcast and on my sort of own legal journey, from VAC schemes and Insight Days to the like. So, to give you a brief overview, when we are talking about commercial lawyers, the first thing to note about is that we are primarily working for our clients. Serving our clients' needs is the most important aspect. And so whatever we do is ultimately to achieve that outcome. Now, what does that look like? Firstly, it's dependent on, of course, what sort of area you're working in and what sector, like we just talked about, you're working in particularly. It also depends on what stage you're at. So whether you're a trainee, whether you're an associate, or whether you're a partner, the kind of work you do and the kind of time you dedicate to each of those tasks is going to vary depending on, of course, how trained you are and how qualified you are. So let's start with trainees, and let's start sort of at the bottom and work our way up. So if we talk about trainees, let's take sort of a more transactional seat. The trainees are likely to be kind of drafting agreements between between the clients and sort of whatever kind of negotiation they want to be doing. They'll also be reviewing any agreements that perhaps that has been sent to them, and this also depends on how good the client's in-house team is. So sometimes if the client themselves is very established and has a massive in-house legal team, it's likely that you're going to be doing more of the reviewing and working with that team to get the best outcome. However, if it is a startup, for example, and they are just sort of kind of coming up and they don't necessarily have an established legal team, you're probably doing a bit more of that grunt work to get everything going. and they probably don't have that is those established agreements they've been doing for years, and so it's a bit more of a process to get to that final stage. And also, in that sort of startup environment, you probably have to do some explaining to your clients about what it is you're doing, what that outcome is going to be, and how likely it is that the client is going to get what they want. So that's the first thing. The other key aspect is, of course, communication. No matter what stage you're at, whether you're a trainee or an associate or a partner, you want to keep your client up to date with what it is that you're doing. Now, lawyers, we bill our time, and that's how lawyers get paid. So it's very important for the client to know exactly what they are paying for. Legal costs can soar, right? And so you want to know that something is, fruitful is coming out of the money and the time that they have spent on this. So you want to keep your client up to date in terms of what stages you're at with the reviewing of the agreements, or perhaps with the negotiation on opposing counsel. All of those sorts of things. Communication is key. And like we spoke about before, concise communication is very important. You don't want to be giving your client, massive pages and pages to read. It needs to be short, but yet to the point, and delivering everything that you want to be delivering. So that's one of the other key things that you might be getting involved with. And the higher up the ladder you get, the more you're having that client contact, because you're obviously you're sort of building that relationship with the client, and you're qualified enough to be able to answer any questions that they may have in return. Now, the other thing you're also going to be doing is, of course, going to court, particularly if you're in a contentious seat. So, as solicitors, unless you have higher rights, you're not going to be actually speaking in court, but you will be working with barristers, whether that's in your own firm or whether that's with sort of external barristers, in order to get to that litigation stage. Now, as solicitors in general, according to SRA, you want to be avoiding getting to litigation if possible. However, sometimes things don't work out the way we want it to. And so when we do end up going to litigation, again, preparing those documents, preparing those bundles, ensuring that you've done all the legal research, ensuring you've kept up to date with the most recent developments in the law, kind of regarding that case. That is all very, very important. So that's where perhaps some of your university skills are going to come in handy. That idea of doing that legal research, of creating academic arguments, and of course working with the barrister to ensure that they have all the information they need when you end up going to court. So that's one of the things that we have on more the contentious side when we do have those disputes. And as I explained earlier, when the two parties have different sort of outcomes that they want to get to. The other side to it, and this is becoming increasingly more and more important, is that idea of building a personal brand and marketing yourself. Now, that doesn't mean, going and telling everyone about yourself all the time, but that means that, you're building your client base as soon as you enter the firm. So, of course, the higher up you get, the more you do of this, because that becomes more kind of, part of your job as you're more qualified and you're more trained in that sort of legal work. But you're sort of doing it from the start. So ensuring that, you're building a relationship with your clients before you start the work, during that doing the work, and also post completion, so that they come back to you for further work, and that's how we keep those relationships going. They will also then recommend you to other people, and also that helps you build a rapport with the rest of your team, particularly if you're a trainee and you want to qualify into a certain seat. So all of those kind of elements are very, very important, and remembering that that is also a part of your job. So what have we spoken about kind of all together, summarizing it? The first thing would be those key skills that we've, you kind of probably already know about and have seen, drafting, negotiating, reviewing that again, doing that process over and over again until you have got to a stage where the client is happy with the final product. That's the first thing. The other one is communicating with your clients, communicating with your supervisor if you're a trainee, and further as you sort of move up, and also communicating with the rest of your team, keeping everyone up to date on your progress. And finally, that idea, of course, going to court as well if you're on a contentious seat. And then also remembering that there is that element of business development and marketing, which you're also doing as a lawyer. And the higher up you get, the bigger part that becomes of your job. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a whistle-stop tour about or some of the skills that commercial lawyers do need to have, and some of the things that you do on a day-to-day basis. As I say, This is just from sort of my research and my kind of knowledge of it so far. But of course, there are some things that you do depending on which firm you're at and depending on the key sector that you're working in. Okay, we've spoken for a while, and if you're still watching this video, chances are you've enjoyed what you've listened to so far. So perhaps that question becomes a little bit easier on why commercial law. So, as the name of this YouTube channel suggests, there are two key elements, right? There is the commerce and there is the law. So, are you someone who's interested in business? Any sort of business, whether that's gaming, whether it's sport, whether it's fashion, whether it's media, whether it is finance. Do any of those areas interest you? And when I say interest you, I mean if you are someone, let's take the example of gaming. Let's say you really, really enjoy that and that's something you do with your friends all the time. If you sit down to consider the business perspective of it, how does it actually operate? How does that business make money? How do they get customers? Why are you, as someone who is sort of a consumer of it, why are you attracted to that particular game? Or, why do you keep coming back to it? Does that side interest you? That is one tick. That means that you are interested in the business side of it. Or let's take the example of fashion. If you are someone who enjoys new clothes and wearing them, do you think about where you're shopping? Do you think about sort of why perhaps you're more attracted shopping online versus shopping kind of in store, or vice versa? Do you think about how particular stores make more money than others, why so many of them perhaps didn't do so well through COVID, which ones are taking over? Do those sorts of things interest you? Perhaps then that's another thing that you do enjoy the business side of all of these sort of industries that we see on a day-to-day basis. That's the first one. The second element is, of course, the law, the legal side. Do you enjoy working with clients to provide those kind of, that legal advice, those legal services? And how can you know that? Well, do you enjoy the regulatory aspects of it? So when you do look at these news articles, do you sort of try and think, okay, what could be some of the problems with this? What could there, in terms of competition, what could happen next? What could be some of the regulatory challenges with it? What could be some of the regulatory opportunities with it? Which jurisdictions can it operate in? Do those things interest you? Or now that I'm talking about it, is that something that you may go away and research? That's another tick that could, kind of suggest that perhaps you have an interest in commercial law. And also, the other element of this is when we are talking about this question and we're trying, especially in a law firm application, you also want to make sure that you're talking about it and evidencing it, right? It's all about evidence. It's all about kind of, proving your case. As we know, as lawyers, you've got to have proof. So do you have some work experience to evidence this? Whether that's an online sort of, legal work experience, whether you've had some in-person work experience, you've joined a high street solicitor's firm, you have gone to court for a day and observed it and really enjoyed it, you have been reading some news articles and have perhaps, written an article about it. Is there anything that you've done which you can evidence to show that you actually have an interest in this field? And bearing in mind that work experience doesn't have to look a certain way. It doesn't have to be at a law firm, because most law firms, especially when you're doing the applications, know that's quite hard to get. If they don't offer a lot of opportunities to their sixth form students or, kind of first years, then chances are they know that it's quite hard for you to then be able to prove that when you are making an application, because it would just end up becoming a vicious cycle. So remember that work experience, especially now after COVID, can be and can take a lot of different forms. Anything that evidences your interest in it, from webinars to forage work experience programs, to high street solicitor firm shadowing, to going to court, all of that is going to count in your work experience section. And again, I can do future videos talking a little bit about some of the kind of opportunities you can apply for if that's something that you would be interested in. And finally, I just want to highlight one key element. So the kind of thing that a lot of people talk about when they talk about commercial law and why they're interested in it is because it keeps them intellectually stimulated. Now, a lot of us probably do like to keep intellectually stimulated, and that's a great thing. But what we want to bear in mind is that that's really not enough. Intellectually stimulated, how and why, and what does that actually mean to you? So remembering that if we are using big broad terms like that we make sure to again evidence it, or to show that we have been kind of had that experience in the past and we want to do more of it in the future. So let's say that I do start up with, that idea that I want to be intellectually stimulated. Well, what have I done? You could talk about perhaps, you've had some side hustles before, like this podcast, YouTube channel. Perhaps you've done something like that on the content side, or you are a web developer, or you're someone who enjoys coding. Maybe you write for a blog. Maybe you've had one of those lemonade stands, at school, or you're doing something now on your university campus. Any of those things which show that you are driven, you are ambitious, you like to think about things outside, you kind of like to think outside the box. All of those things evidence your kind of, interests and your skills. So the examples don't have to be big, but they have to be there. That's what we want to bear in mind. And so that this idea of commercial law is talking about those personal experiences that you've had and linking them to the skills that are going to make you a good commercial lawyer. So identifying that skill, showing where you've evidenced that or showing an example of it, and then saying how you're going to be using that if you do enter the profession. That is hands down the best way to be able to answer that question. And that has brought us to the end of this video. So we have answered those 4 questions. What is commercial law? Secondly, what sectors fall into it? Next question was, what do commercial lawyers do? And finally, why commercial law should be for you. So those are the 4 questions that we've answered today. Hope that you found this video useful and hope that you took something away from it. Please do let me know your thoughts, your feedback, any positive, negative criticism. All criticism is appreciated and all feedback is truly appreciated. So please do let me know what you think about this video. Also, let me know any sort of future videos that you kind of would want me to talk about or want me to make. I do have a few ideas in mind, but of course, getting your ideas would be super useful for me and would really allow me to, understand what the audience wants and perhaps what I can do more of. So that would be super, super helpful from your end. I really hope that you liked this video. If you have liked it, please do give it a thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel and turn that bell on so you're notified when there's a new video. And also, please do follow us on TikTok. It's commerce.meets.law. Of course, also follow the podcast, which is on Spotify, called Commerce Meets Law, and the Instagram by the same name. I think I've said Commerce Meets Law far too many times now, so I will not say it one more time. But I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, day, night, whenever you're watching this. And I'll see you very soon in my next video. Bye.